Jake Murphy felt the cold metal floor through his boots as he stepped off the transport shuttle and into Nexus Station. The air smelled different here, like ozone and something sweet that he could not name. His small bag hung over his shoulder and he tried not to look as nervous as he felt. Around him, the massive docking bay stretched out like a metal cavern filled with ships from across the galaxy. He was not tall like the other beings walking past him. At 5 feet 6 inches, Jake looked like a child next to the aliens that moved through the station. His brown hair was cut short and neat, and his blue uniform was pressed and clean, but none of that seemed to matter when a creature the size of a building walked by without even noticing him. The first alien he saw made him stop walking. It stood 8 feet tall and looked like it was made of living crystal. Its body caught the light from the station's ceiling and threw rainbow colors across the walls. When it moved, Jake could hear a soft chiming sound like wind through glass. The creature's head turned toward him, and Jake saw eyes that glowed with cold blue light. Behind the crystal being came something that looked like a giant bear walking on 2 legs. Its fur was thick and dark, and when it opened its mouth, Jake saw teeth that could tear through metal. The bear thing wore a uniform covered in medals and symbols that meant nothing to Jake, but he could tell it was important just by the way it walked. More aliens filled the docking bay. Some looked like snakes with arms, moving in smooth curves across the floor. Others had too many eyes or wings that folded against their backs. Jake had studied pictures of these species for months, but seeing them in person made his stomach tight with fear and wonder. A voice spoke behind him, and Jake turned to see another human walking toward him. The man was older, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen many difficult things. His name was Captain Rick Stone, and he was the only other human on Nexus Station. "You must be Murphy," Stone said, holding out his hand. "I got word from Earth that they were sending their best diplomat." Jake shook the man's hand and tried to smile. "I hope their information is right." Stone laughed, but it did not sound happy. "Kid, I have been here for 6 months, and I can tell you that none of these aliens think much of humans. They look at us like we are bugs that learn to talk." As they walked through the station, Jake saw what Stone meant. Aliens would look down at them and then look away as if humans were not worth their time. Some would make sounds that might have been laughter. Others would speak in languages Jake did not know. But the tone made it clear they were not saying nice things. The station was huge, with corridors that stretched for miles in every direction. The walls were covered in symbols and writing from dozens of different worlds. Screens showed information in languages Jake had never seen, and the air was full of sounds and smells from creatures he could not even imagine. Stone led him to a small room that would be Jake's home for the next few months. It was clean but simple, with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out into space. Through the glass, Jake could see ships coming and going, some so large they blocked out the stars. "The big meeting starts tomorrow," Stone said. "You will meet all the important aliens then. Try not to let them get to you." That night, Jake sat at his desk and looked through his files one more time. He had studied every known alien species, their languages, their customs, and their politics. He knew more about galactic history than most humans knew about their own planet. But as he looked out his window at the alien ships, he wondered if all his studying would be enough. The next morning came too soon. Jake put on his best uniform and walked to the main conference room. The doors were 20 feet tall and made of some kind of metal that seemed to glow from the inside. When they opened, Jake stepped into a room that took his breath away. The ceiling was so high he could not see the top. The walls curved in impossible ways, and the floor was made of something that looked like liquid starlight. In the center of the room was a huge table surrounded by chairs of every size and shape. The aliens were already there, and when Jake walked in, they all turned to look at him. The crystal being he had seen in the docking bay stood near the table, its body chiming softly. Next to it was the giant bear creature, its dark eyes fixed on Jake. "So this is what the humans send to represent their species," the crystal being said. Its voice sounded like music, but cold music that made Jake think of winter. A juvenile, the bear creature made a sound that might have been laughter. Perhaps they believe we will be charmed by their small stature. Jake felt his face get hot, but he kept his voice calm. "I am Jake Murphy, diplomatic representative of Earth and the human colonies." A snake-like alien with 6 arms moved closer to the table. Its scales were green and gold, and when it spoke, Jake could see a forked tongue. How amusing. The tiny creatures think they can play with the adults. More laughter came from around the room. Jake looked at each alien face and saw the same thing in all of them. They thought he was a joke. They thought humans were weak and stupid and not worth their time. But Jake had not come this far to give up now. He had trained for years for this moment. He had studied harder than anyone else in his class. He knew he was small compared to these beings, but he also knew that size was not everything. He walked to his chair at the table and sat down. The chair was too big for him, making him look even smaller, but he sat up straight and looked each alien in the eye. "I am here to speak for humanity," he said. "I hope we can work together for the good of all our species." The crystal being made a sound like breaking glass. "We shall see, little human. We shall see." The next few weeks were the hardest of Jake's life. Every day he would go to meetings where aliens talked about important things, and every day they would act like he was not there. When he tried to speak, they would ignore him or make jokes about his size. The crystal being, who told Jake to call him Ambassador Clicks, was the worst. During trade meetings, he would speak over Jake as if the human was not even sitting at the table. When Jake tried to ask questions about shipping routes, Clicks would make his chiming laugh and say something about how humans were too simple to understand space travel. The bear creature was General Grex, and he was almost as bad. He would look at Jake with his dark eyes and shake his massive head. "Your species is new to space," Grex would say. "You should listen and learn, not try to speak with your betters." But it was the snake alien that hurt Jake the most. Her name was Ambassador Sec, and she had a way of making Jake feel smaller than he already was. During one meeting about mining rights, she slithered around the table and stopped right next to Jake's chair. "Tell me, little human," she said, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Do you even understand what we are discussing? These are complex matters of interstellar law." Jake kept his voice steady. "I have studied interstellar law for 3 years at the academy." Sec's laugh sounded like steam escaping from a pipe. 3 years, how cute. "I have been studying law for longer than your species has had written language." The other aliens around the table made sounds of agreement. Jake felt his cheeks burn with shame and anger, but he did not let it show on his face. He had learned early in life that showing weakness only made bullies worse. During another meeting, this one about defense agreements, an insect-like alien with compound eyes and clicking mouth parts joined the mockery. His name was Commander Zek, and he was even bigger than General Grex. "I do not understand why the Council allows primitives to attend these meetings," Zek clicked. "Their small brains cannot process multidimensional strategic thinking." Jake had written his master's thesis on multidimensional strategic thinking, but he knew that telling them would only bring more laughter. Instead, he took notes and tried to learn what he could from listening. The worst part was not just the insults. It was being left out. When the real decisions were made, Jake found himself excluded from private meetings. He would see the other ambassadors gathering in small groups, talking in low voices about things he was not allowed to hear. Captain Stone tried to help. He would meet with Jake in the evenings and share what information he could gather from the station's human staff. "They are planning something big," Stone said one night as they sat in Jake's small room. "Some kind of joint military exercise. But they will not tell me what." Jake looked out his window at the stars and felt more alone than ever. "Maybe they are right," he said. "Maybe humans are not ready for this." Stone's face got hard. "Do not let them break you, kid. I have seen what humans can do when they put their minds to it. We built ships that can cross the galaxy in weeks. We solved problems that other species said were impossible. Do not let a bunch of bullies make you forget what you are." But it was hard not to forget. Every day brought new humiliations. During a cultural exchange meeting, Ambassador Sec suggested that Jake might be more comfortable in the station's nursery areas with the alien children. When Jake tried to present Earth's proposal for a new trade route, General Grex cut him off and said that humans should focus on learning to walk before trying to run. The breaking point came during a session about resource allocation. Jake had spent days preparing a presentation about Earth's mineral resources and what humanity could offer the galactic community. He had charts and data and examples that showed how human mining techniques could benefit everyone, but when it came time for his presentation, Ambassador Click simply said, "I think we have heard enough from the junior species today." The other aliens made their agreement sounds, and Jake's presentation was pushed to the end of the schedule. By the time they got to it, most of the important aliens had left for other meetings. Jake gave his presentation to an almost empty room. Only a few low-level staff members stayed to listen, and they spent most of the time looking at their communication devices. That night, Jake sat in his room and wondered if he should just go home. He had failed at the most important job humanity had ever given him. The aliens would never respect humans, and Jake was starting to think they might be right to look down on his species. But then he remembered something his training instructor had told him back on Earth. Commander Lisa Bennett had chosen Jake for this mission not because he was the biggest or the strongest, but because he was smart and because he never gave up. The galaxy is full of big, strong species, she had said. What it needs is someone who can think their way through problems. Jake opened his files and started studying again. If the aliens would not listen to him in meetings, maybe he could find another way to prove that humans belonged in the galactic community. He started paying attention to things the other species missed. He noticed that the station's power systems were not running as well as they should. He saw patterns in the alien behavior that showed tensions between different groups. He watched and learned and waited for his chance to show what humans could really do. The chance would come soon, though Jake did not know it yet. Something was happening on the station, something the other species had not noticed, and when the crisis came, it would be the smallest person in the room who would have to save everyone. Jake did not know that he was being watched. Far from the meeting rooms and diplomatic areas of Nexus Station, in a part of the station that did not appear on any official maps, something very dangerous was paying attention to the small human. The ship had arrived 3 days ago, but no one had seen it dock. It was black as space itself and shaped like a blade. Its hull absorbed light instead of reflecting it, making it almost invisible against the stars. The few station workers who caught glimpses of it quickly looked away and found reasons to be somewhere else. The ship belonged to the Cathera, and the Cathera were the reason that most species in the galaxy had trouble sleeping at night. They came from the outer rim, from worlds so harsh that only the strongest and smartest could survive. While other species had built their civilizations around trade and cooperation, the Cathera had built theirs around being the perfect predators. They were not evil, exactly. They did not kill for sport or destroy planets for fun, but they were hunters by nature, and everything they did was about finding and testing the strongest prey. They had weapons that could crack moons and shields that could turn aside the energy of stars. Most species had never seen a Cathera in person. They were like ghost stories that parents told their children to make them behave. The Galactic Council had tried to make contact with them many times over the centuries, but the Cathera had never responded. They watched from the shadows and judged from a distance. The leader of this particular Cathera ship was called Elder Vex. He was 7 feet tall and covered in scales so dark they seemed to drink light. His eyes were yellow like a cat's, and when he moved, it was with the smooth grace of something that had never known fear. Vex had been watching the station for weeks now, using sensors so advanced that they could count the hairs on a human's head from 1,000 miles away. He was particularly interested in the new species that had recently joined the galactic community. Humans were strange. They were small and weak compared to most spacefaring species, but they had developed faster than light travel in less time than it took most species to invent the wheel. Their technology was primitive but effective, like a stone knife that could cut through steel. But what really caught Vex's attention was not human technology or human history. It was the behavior of one specific human. While the other species at the diplomatic meetings focused on showing their strength and importance, the small human sat quietly and watched everything. Vex could see through his ship's sensors how the human's eyes moved, taking in details that the larger aliens missed. When Ambassador Clicks made his chiming sounds of derision, the human's body language did not show fear or submission. Instead, Vex saw the micro-expressions of someone analyzing a threat and planning how to deal with it. When General Grex used his size to intimidate, the human did not back down. His heart rate increased, yes, but so did his focus. Vex had seen this response before in the apex predators of his own world. Most interesting of all was how the human behaved when he thought no one was watching. Late at night, when the diplomatic meetings were over, the human would study technical manuals and station schematics. He would run calculations and simulations that had nothing to do with his official duties. Vex called his second in command, a female Cathera named Syl who had scales like polished obsidian. "What do you make of the small one?" Vex asked. Syl had been watching the feeds as well. "He shows the signs," she said, "but his species classification does not match. This was true. According to all the galactic databases, humans were classified as a peaceful species with limited physical capabilities. They were supposed to be farmers and traders, not hunters. But Vex had learned long ago not to trust databases over his own observations. He had seen species that looked harmless turn out to be deadly when threatened. He had also seen species that looked terrifying crumble at the first sign of real danger. The human was small, but he carried himself like something much larger. When threatened, he did not run or submit. He studied his enemies and looked for weaknesses. "Run a deep scan on their homeworld," Vex ordered. "I want to know what kind of environment produced this species." The information that came back made both Kythera go very still. Earth was a death world, not as harsh as the Kythera homeworld, but harsh enough. It was a planet where the dominant species had survived ice ages and volcanic winters, where they had fought their way to the top of a food chain filled with creatures much larger and stronger than themselves. Humans had not conquered their world through size or natural weapons. They had done it through intelligence, cooperation, and the kind of stubborn refusal to give up that marked all true apex predators. "They are hunters," Syl said quietly. "The galactic community does not see it because they are not looking for it, but they are hunters." Vex nodded. "And this Jake Murphy, he is their scout, sent ahead to study the new territory and identify threats." Neither Kythera spoke for a while as they continued to watch. On their screens they could see Jake in his small room, working late into the night on problems that the other species had dismissed as too complex for human understanding. The other delegates thought they were dealing with a primitive species that had gotten lucky with technology. They had no idea that they were sharing a station with something that had spent millions of years learning how to survive in a universe that wanted to kill it. Vex made a decision that would change everything. "Continue monitoring, but prepare for contact." Syl's yellow eyes widened slightly. The Kythera had not made direct contact with any species in over 300 years. "Elder, are you certain?" "Look at him," Vex said, pointing at the screen where Jake was still working. "He solves problems that stump species with twice his brain capacity. He shows no fear in the face of creatures that could crush him without effort. He studies his environment constantly, looking for advantages and weaknesses." Vex's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of deep emotion in his species. "He is what we have been waiting for, a species that hunts not with claws and teeth but with mind and spirit." The elder stood and walked to the viewport where he could see Nexus Station spinning slowly in the darkness. Soon, very soon, he would reveal himself. But first he wanted to see how the small human would handle a real crisis. Because crises had a way of showing who was truly a predator, and who was just pretending to be one. The crisis began during what was supposed to be a routine meeting about resource allocation. Jake sat in his usual chair at the big table, listening as Ambassador Clix and General Grex argued about mining rights in the Vega system. The crystal being's voice was getting higher and more musical, which Jake had learned meant he was angry. The Zephyrian Collective has had claims to those asteroids for over 2 centuries. General Grex slammed one massive paw on the table, making the whole thing shake. "Claims mean nothing if you lack the strength to enforce them, Crystal Singer." Ambassador Sex slithered between them, her 6 arms weaving in the air. "Perhaps we should focus on more important matters. The humans have been suspiciously quiet about their intentions in that sector." All eyes turned to Jake, and he felt the familiar tightness in his stomach. "Earth has no current interests in the Vega system," he said calmly. "We are still establishing our presence in systems closer to home." Commander Zek clicked his mandibles in what might have been laughter. "Of course they have no interests. Their primitive ships could not reach Vega in less than 50 years. The insults continued, but Jake was not really listening anymore. Something was wrong with the station, and he was the only one who seemed to notice it. The lights had been flickering slightly for the past hour, and there was a vibration in the floor that should not have been there. Jake had spent weeks studying the station's technical manuals, partly out of boredom and partly because he wanted to understand how everything worked. He knew that Nexus Station was powered by a fusion reactor that used magnetic fields to contain plasma hot enough to melt planets. The vibration he felt suggested that those magnetic fields were not as stable as they should be. While the aliens continued their argument, Jake quietly activated his personal datapad and accessed the station's public monitoring systems. What he saw made his blood run cold. The reactor's magnetic containment field was fluctuating in a pattern that the station's automated systems were not designed to recognize. The fluctuations were small now, but they were growing stronger. If they continued to increase at the current rate, the containment would fail in less than 5 minutes. When a fusion reactor lost containment, it did not explode like a bomb. It was worse than that. The plasma would burn through the station's hull like acid through paper, venting atmosphere and radiation into space. Everyone in the affected sections would die, and the station itself might break apart. Jake looked around the room at the arguing aliens and realized that none of them understood what was happening. Their sensors were designed to monitor normal operations, not cascade failures caused by the interaction of multiple alien technologies. He stood up from his chair, interrupting Ambassador Clix in the middle of a particularly flowery insult directed at General Grex. "The reactor is going to fail," Jake said loudly. The room went quiet. All the aliens turned to look at him with expressions that ranged from surprise to annoyance. Ambassador Clix's crystalline body chimed with derision. "Impossible. Our safety systems would have detected any malfunction. Your safety systems are not designed for this type of failure," Jake said, moving toward the emergency console near the door. The interaction between Zephyrian crystal technology and Valdorian bioneural processors is creating resonance patterns that destabilize the magnetic containment. General Grex stood up, his massive form blocking Jake's path to the console. "You dare suggest our technology is flawed, tiny one?" Jake looked up at the bear-like alien who could have crushed him with one paw. "I am suggesting that when different technologies work together, sometimes they create problems that none of them would have alone. We have maybe 3 minutes before the containment fails completely." Commander Zek clicked his mandibles aggressively. The arrogance of this primitive species knows no bounds. They think they understand systems that predate their civilization by millennia. But Ambassador Sek was looking at her own instruments now, and her scaled face was showing the first signs of concern. The energy readings are unusual. Jake tried to move past General Grex, but the massive alien would not budge. "Please, I know how to stabilize the containment, but I need to access the emergency controls." "You will touch nothing," Grex growled. "This is clearly some human trick to gain access to our technology." The lights flickered more noticeably now, and a warning tone began to sound somewhere in the walls. Jake felt the vibration in the floor getting stronger. 2 minutes, he said quietly. Ambassador Clix's chiming became more frantic. "Surely our technicians can handle any minor malfunction." "Your technicians are not here," Jake said. "They are 3 levels down, and even if they started running now, they could not get here in time." The warning tone was getting louder, and now even the aliens could feel the vibration. Commander Zek's compound. Eyes were looking at his instruments with growing alarm. "The plasma temperature is rising beyond normal parameters," he clicked. Jake could see the fear starting to show in their alien faces. These beings had thought they were masters of their technology, but now that technology was about to kill them all. 1 minute, Jake said. "Please, let me try." Ambassador Sek was the first to move. She slithered quickly away from General Grex, clearing a path to the emergency console. "Let the human try." Grex roared his disagreement, but Commander Zek was already backing away from Jake. "If he can stop this, let him." Jake ran to the console and began working as fast as his small hands could move. The controls were designed for beings much larger than him, but he had studied the schematics until he could operate them in his sleep. The key was not to fight the resonance patterns, but to work with them. Jake began rerouting power through secondary systems, using the natural frequencies of the different alien technologies to create a stabilizing harmony instead of destructive interference. His fingers flew over the controls, implementing a solution that he had worked out weeks ago as a theoretical exercise. He had never imagined he would need to use it for real. The warning tone stopped. The vibration in the floor faded away. The lights stopped flickering and returned to their normal steady glow. Jake stepped back from the console, his heart hammering in his chest. Around him, the alien ambassadors stood in stunned silence. Then the main doors of the chamber opened with a sound like escaping atmosphere, and something walked in that made every alien in the room take an involuntary step backward. The creature was tall and dark, with scales that seemed to absorb light and eyes that glowed like yellow stars. When it moved, it was with the fluid grace of something that had never known what it meant to be prey. Jake had never seen anything like it, but somehow he was not afraid. Maybe it was because he had just prevented a disaster, or maybe it was because the creature was looking at him with something that might have been respect. The alien spoke, and its voice was like distant thunder. The small one speaks truth. My ship's sensors confirm that containment failure was imminent. The chamber fell into absolute silence as the dark creature entered. Jake had never felt anything like the presence this being carried with it. It was not just size or strength, though the alien was clearly both large and powerful. It was something deeper, something that spoke to the most primitive parts of his brain and whispered that he was in the presence of an apex predator. Ambassador Clix's crystalline form had stopped chiming entirely. His body, which usually caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns, seemed dull and lifeless. General Grex, who had never backed down from anything in Jake's presence, was pressed against the far wall with his ears flat against his massive head. Commander Zek's compound eyes were focused on the floor, and his clicking had become so quiet it was almost inaudible. Ambassador Sek had coiled her serpentine body into the smallest space possible. Her 6 arms wrapped around herself protectively, but Jake stood where he was, next to the emergency console, and looked directly at the newcomer. He felt afraid, yes, but it was the kind of fear that sharpened his mind instead of paralyzing it. He had felt something similar when facing down bullies in school, or during his final exams at the academy. The dark alien moved closer, and Jake could see details that made his breath catch. The creature's scales were not just black, but seemed to contain depth, like looking into deep space. Its eyes were yellow and slitted like a cat's, and they missed nothing as they swept the room. "I am Elder Vex of the Kythera," the being said, and Jake felt the words as much as heard them. "I have been watching this station for some time." Jake had never heard of the Kythera, but from the way the other aliens reacted, they were clearly something to be feared. Ambassador Clix made a small chiming sound that might have been a whimper. Elder Vex continued moving until he stood directly in front of Jake. Up close, the alien was even more impressive. He was at least 7 feet tall, with a build that suggested incredible strength hidden beneath his scaled skin. But it was his eyes that held Jake's attention. They were intelligent, calculating, and completely without fear. "You saw what others missed," Vex said, his voice pitched for Jake's ears alone. "You acted when others were frozen by panic. You faced danger without retreat." Jake found his voice somehow. "I just did what needed to be done." Something that might have been a smile crossed the alien's features. "Yes, that is exactly what you did." Vex turned to address the room, and his voice carried easily to every corner. "The human speaks correctly about the reactor failure. My ship detected the cascade resonance 37 minutes ago. We monitored the situation to see how it would be resolved." General Grex found enough courage to speak, though his voice was much smaller than usual. "You were watching us. Why did you not warn us?" "Because I wanted to see which species would prove worthy of survival," Vex replied simply. "The Kythera have observed the Galactic Council for centuries. We have seen much technology and many impressive civilizations, but we have seen very little wisdom." The elder moved to the center of the room, and the other aliens instinctively gave him space. "You mock the humans for their size. You dismiss them for their youth as a spacefaring species. You treat them like children because they do not match your expectations of what strength should look like." Ambassador Clix's chiming returned, but it was nervous and high-pitched. "Elder Vex, surely you cannot mean to suggest that humans are comparable to established species with millions of years of evolution?" Vex's yellow eyes fixed on the crystal being, and Clix immediately went silent. "I suggest nothing. I state facts. While you argued about mining rights, the human was monitoring systems that none of you thought to check. While you displayed your supposed superiority, he was learning how your technologies interact with each other." The elder began to walk around the table, and Jake noticed that his movement was completely silent despite his size. "When crisis came, which of you moved to solve the problem? Which of you had the knowledge and skill to prevent disaster?" Commander Zek's clicking became slightly louder. The human's action was impressive, but surely it was just luck that he knew the correct procedure. "Luck," Vex repeated, and there was something dangerous in his voice. "Let me tell you about luck. The Kythera homeworld is a place where luck gets you killed. We survive because we prepare for every possibility, because we study our environment constantly, and because we act decisively when action is required." He stopped walking and looked directly at Jake again. "These are not the traits of a prey species. These are the defining characteristics of an apex predator. The room was so quiet that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. The other aliens were staring at him with expressions he had never seen before. Fear, respect, and something that might have been recognition. The human race is young, Vex continued, but they carry the hunter's spirit. They are survivors who have climbed to the top of their world's food chain not through size or strength, but through intelligence and adaptability. They are what we have been searching for. Ambassador Sec found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. Searching for. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders, Vex said, but it is also full of dangers that most species are too comfortable to recognize. The Kithera have remained separate from the galactic community, because we saw only merchants and politicians, beings who had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. The elder moved back to stand before Jake, and this time he extended one clawed hand. But in this small human, we see something different. We see the qualities that matter when the comfortable universe shows its teeth. Jake looked at the offered hand and understood that this moment would change everything, not just for him, but for all of humanity. He reached out and grasped the alien's hand, surprised by how warm it was. The Kithera recognize humans as kin, Vex announced. We claim them as fellow predators in the great hunt of existence. The declaration sent shockwaves through the chamber. Jake could see the other aliens exchanging glances, their attitudes toward him shifting visibly. The small human who had been dismissed and mocked was suddenly someone very different in their eyes. General Grex was the first to speak. Elder Vex, with respect, humans are a small and relatively weak species. So are my people compared to you, Vex replied. Valdorians outweigh Kithera by nearly 2 to 1. Your claws are longer, your muscles stronger, yet I notice you do not challenge me. The massive bear-like alien said nothing. Strength is not about size, Vex continued. It is about the willingness and ability to do what must be done when others cannot or will not act. Today, when all of your superior technology and ancient wisdom failed you, it was the smallest being in this room who saved your lives. Elder Vex released Jake's hand and stepped back. The Kithera Collective formally recognizes humanity as an apex predator species. We extend to them the protection and partnership that we have never offered to any other race. With that, he turned and walked toward the chamber doors. But before leaving, he looked back one final time. Do not make the mistake of judging any species by their appearance, he said. The universe is full of small, quiet things that can kill you if you underestimate them. The doors closed behind him with a soft whisper, leaving Jake alone with aliens who would never look at him the same way again. The tiny human had earned his place not through size or strength, but through the most dangerous trait any species could possess, the intelligence and courage to act when action was needed. In the days that followed, everything changed for Jake and for humanity's place in the galaxy. The other species began to listen when he spoke. They asked for his opinions on complex problems. They stopped treating Earth like a junior partner and started treating it like a potential threat. Jake had proven that humans belonged among the stars, not as servants or supplicants, but as equals in the great game of survival that was interstellar civilization.